Welcome to Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today I'd like to continue my mini-series on the World War II in the Eastern Front, or Operation Barbarossa, or German invasion and Russian victory. In the previous video, I described briefly the events of 1941, the beginning of the war, and the Battle of Moscow. Today I'd like to focus on another very important theater of war, and that is Leningrad. Leningrad is in the north. It is a former imperial capital. It is a city of my birth, and it is one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. As a former imperial capital, it was built from 1703 on the orders of Peter the Great. And then it continued to be a center of Russian empire with the Romanov endless palaces and beautiful bridges. And it's a city of culture where there's the opera and ballet and symphony and dozens of theaters. And it was like this in the Soviet times as well. Now, as we all know, Saint Petersburg was renamed Leningrad in 1924 after the death of Lenin, in some kind of connection with the revolution, even though Lenin never lived there for a very short time in 1917, and that was it. In any case, Leningrad was one of the three most important industrial centers of the Soviet Union, next to Moscow region, Leningrad industrial region, and the Urals, and of course Donbass in Ukraine, Soviet Socialist Republic. So let me get to the story of the war, and it is probably one of the most tragic stories of World War II. But let's start from the beginning. The front line was moving in the north very quickly, just like is in the rest of the Soviet Union. Already by 14th of July, the Germans were at Luga, which is a suburb of Leningrad, which is about 50 kilometers or so. So they covered this huge distance of more than 1,000 kilometers in a matter of 3 weeks. But then the resistance stiffened, and it was getting to be a very slow movement from then on until the 4th of September. And that is on the 4th of September that the Germans approached the city and essentially closed in the gap. No, the reason that it was surrounded was because Leningrad is on the river Neva. And the river Neva is quite short, slightly more than 100 kilometers, and it flows from the Ladoga Lake, which is one of the largest, I think it is the largest lake in Europe. And that means that the water flows from the Ladoga Lake to the Gulf of Finland, and at the estuary of this river is the city itself. So what happened was that the Germans advanced from the south, and the Finns, the armed forces of Finland, they advanced on the north. And they took over very quickly the territory that used to belong to Finland, the so-called Old Border, which lies, maybe a dozen kilometers from the city line. And this is why Stalin actually conducted this winter war with Finland, in order to move that border, as it was too close. But the Finns didn't stop at the Old Border. They went further east, and they came to the northern shore of the Ladoga Lake along the river, which means that they have completely blocked or cut the land route to Murmansk and the Arctic Ocean. That was completely cut off, and the Germans surrounded the city and came to the Ladoga Lake in the south, which means that there was no connection by land to the rest of Russia, the Soviet Union, only, and the only connection that there was through the river and the Ladoga Lake. And that means that any connection, any transport that tried this route was constantly bombarded from the shore of the Ladoga Lake. But that was the only connection. Now, the city was surrounded, and the so-called siege of Leningrad, or the blockade of Leningrad, began, which lasted 872 days. Now, in literature, this period is known as the 900 days for perhaps poetic reasons, but in fact it was 872. Of those, the hardest period was from September 1941 to January 1943. In January 1943, the little corridor was along the Neva and the southern shore of the Ladoga Lake was won back, which made it possible to establish a land link to the rest of the country. And within weeks, they built a railroad and the asphalt road along this little corridor, and that made it possible to resume more or less normal supplies of the city, which continued to be just completely surrounded, excluding this small corridor, for another year until January 1944, and this is when the siege was lifted. Now, this briefly the outline in terms of major event, but what really makes this story remarkable is the suffering of the people in the city and the death toll that it incurred. As I mentioned, the most difficult period was during the winter of 1941-1942. The city at the beginning had 3 million people. On the eve of the war, 3 million people. Just about the same number as was slightly larger than it was in the Tsarist times. Of those, there was a large working class population. There were many, many factories, quite famous ones that are still in operation. The shipbuilding, the machine building, the tank building, the textiles, all kinds of enterprises with many, many quite well-known companies that were based in Leningrad, Saint Petersburg. Also, they had about 500 sailors and soldiers locked up in the city as the entire Baltic fleet retreated from the Baltic into the Gulf of Finland and was based in its small island Kronstadt just outside the city, where most of the ships were there, and their significance was important because they had huge guns, and that effectively prevented the Germans from taking the city later in the year. Also, what protected the city is that during the summer months, the entire population was mobilized for the so-called labor obligation, which means that people after work were obligated to come out and dig the trenches. So they dug in-depth fortifications and all kinds of tank obstacles and trenches and all kinds of other things in order to stop the further German advance. Now, whether the Germans could have taken it or not, I don't know. This is sort of impossible right now to say, but what we do know is that Hitler had very contradictory statements about Leningrad, Saint Petersburg. At one point, there is a document that says that the city had to be totally destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth, and then this territory given to Finland. In other area documents, there is mention of desire not to waste the lives of German soldiers on taking the city and fighting it street into street, but essentially to starve it out, to block any access to it and let the population die out. And this is pretty much what was happening. Now, as I said before, the Soviet authorities had to introduce the rationing system, which kept diminishing from every passing week. And it at first was close to 500 grams of there was all kinds of scale of how much flour and food and sugar and meat and all that. But very quickly it all dissipated. And by December 1941 is the worst time of all. And the food ration was 145 grams of bread. That's it. 145 grams of bread, which means that there was a massive starvation. And the city experienced very, very high toll rate. The toll rate, the death rate was about 50,000 to 70,000 persons per month. And so this, the most difficult period lasted from November 1941 to April 1942, 6 months or so, and about 50 to 70,000 people died during each month. Now, the Germans also continually bombarded the city, and there was very serious destruction, especially in the areas adjacent to the front line. And just to give you an example, there's a beautiful, beautiful palace of the Tsars called Peterhof. And what you could see on your screens now is the way Peterhof, with its gorgeous fountains, looked before the war, and actually it is the way it looks now, totally restored, and the way it looked in 1944. Well, obviously, all the destruction was done at the storming of Peterhof in 1941. The same goes for Tsarskoye Selo, or Tsarist village, or Pushkin, as it is called today. This is the gorgeous palace of Catherine II, and this is, you see on your pictures how it looks today, how it looked before the war, and the destruction during the war. So there was a lot of destruction, but of course the most difficult was the loss of human life. Now, in the winter of 1941, there was essentially very cold weather. The average was -20, -30. At some point, it was more than -35 in the city, which actually meant that the entire transport just basically stopped. There was no more fuel for the buses, there was no electricity for the trolleys and trams, and it essentially was silent. There was no traffic of any kind. Electricity was on and off, and when it was on, it was for the enterprises, for some factories, especially war-related ones, that continued to work despite all of this. And the Kirov plant, or the Putilov plant by the old name, continued to produce tanks, and the front line was actually 4 kilometers from the Putilov plant. And it was 16 kilometers from the front line to the Winter Palace, the very heart of the city. As it was so cold, water pipes froze and then burst. And so there was no water supply. There was very occasionally electricity supply, and it was exceptionally cold. So a lot of deaths were attributed to the cold. If there is an expression, drop dead, this is exactly Leningrad in December 1941. Many people simply dropped dead on the street as they were exhausted, and there was no way to get any fuel. Pretty much all furniture was burnt up, and the trees in the city were cut down and burnt. But one had to have the strength to even cut them and saw them and make it possible to burn them, which was beyond the capacity of most people. Interesting statistics is that more men died than women, probably because many of them continued to work and spent more energy, and they were completely exhausted and just couldn't take it. Now, when I give you the statistics, it's pretty much statistics. 70,000 a month doesn't mean much except statistics. But what we have is, everybody from Leningrad knows this, and all Russian children study it in school. And I want to give this as an example too. This is a diary of a small girl. Her name is Tanya Savicheva. And she didn't write much in her diary, but she did mark in her little diary the dates when somebody of her family died. And that, of course, is quite touching. The first entry is on December 28, 1941. Tanya just wrote, Zhenya died at 12 o'clock in the morning. Zhenya was her sister who worked in the factory, and she was the first to die. The next entry is January 25. Grandmother died. That's it. There's nothing else. And you see a picture of these entries. The official diagnosis was she died from starvation, from dystrophy, as they called it at that time, which is essentially malnutrition. Then the next entry is 17th of March. Brother Leonid died at the factory. Then on the 13th of April, Dядя Vasya, which means Uncle Vasily, died on the 13th of April. The next entry is May 10, 1942. Uncle Alexei died, also from starvation, from dystrophy or malnutrition. The next entry is on the 12th of May. Mother died. The mother of Tanya, Maria, died. And the most touching one is a week later, where she wrote, all the Savichevis died. The entire family I left alone. I checked what happened to Tanya later. She was taken to the orphanage, and she was later in the year 42 evacuated from the city. But unfortunately, she died too of malnutrition and tuberculosis in 1944. So the diary of this little girl makes it a little more heartfelt for many of us, what the people of Leningrad went through. Thank you very much, and I will continue this mini-series on the war in Russia, and the next one in a few days will be about the Battle of Stalingrad. Thank you.